Hello and welcome to Artifacts, a living archive dedicated to preserving the first-person stories of queer, avant-garde, and underground culture, told by those who lived it. Today's episode is part of our series Silver Factory, an enthralling journey through Andy Warhol's factory, whose inhabitants included an array of characters, from socialites to superstars and speed freaks. Today's episode features a 2001 interview with artist, writer, and Warhol superstar Ultraviolet. Born Isabelle Collin Dufresne to a strict religious household in southeast France, Ultra's rebellious youth led her to New York City in the 50s, where she would blossom as an outrageous socialite and muse to Salvador Dalí. After being introduced to Andy Warhol in 1965, she became a staple of the Silver Factory film scene, choosing the name Ultraviolet and starring in films such as The Life of Juanita Castro and I, a Man. After leaving the factory in the 70s, Ultra continued to work as an actor while working independently on her own art and writing. A near-death experience in 1973 was the catalyst for a new connection with spirituality that would become a major part of Ultra's life and work. In this interview, Ultra reflects on life in the cultural capital of the world at a critical point in art history, and pieces together the enigma of Andy Warhol through his many parts: the artist, the filmmaker, the capitalist, and finally, the spiritual being. This episode also features moments from a 2004 interview, where Ultra reacts to clips from other Artifacts interviews with Silver Factory icons.
Today in 2001, I don't know if I'm a different person than the person people want to hear about from the 60s, but I suppose there is a continuum. But my specialty is change. I have changed many times in my life. And when I meet people today, they say, "Oh, you don't drink, oh, you don't smoke, oh, you don't take drugs." And I said, "No, is that possible to survive that way?" And they say, "Yes." Well, I came from France and I had a turmoil childhood. My parents were quite bourgeois and I was raised Catholic and I couldn't stand it. And I had actually my own revolution. Actually, I consider myself a baby lib, meaning that when I was in the tummy of my mother, I sort of looked down to this earth and I said, no way, this is not made for me. I don't want to go there. And I refused to come out. Anyway, eventually, I did come out on skis because I was born in Grenoble. Anyway, I had my own revolution. I rebelled in the convent where they put me, so much so that they say this child is possessed. And I was exorcised. It didn't work. On the contrary, I amplify in naughtiness. And then they put me in a correction home, which was actually, retrospectively, probably very hard. Anyway, and when I came out, my parents said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "America, the land of the free and the brave." So here I was parachuted in New York. I knew nothing about history and time and what have you. And I landed into the kind of revolutionary culture. Anyway, the 60s were terribly dynamic. That was, in French we would say, a charnière époque. I don't know what's the word in English. There was energy in the air. The most interesting aspect was that the USA had become the uncontested leader of the world. And the crowning of the American dream was when the first man walked on the moon. That proved that the American dream and capitalism was able to deliver and concretize the dream. No, at the time in the 60s, we were just having fun, playing, smiling, laughing, fornicating. But it's today with time and reflection that I sort of can assess the time. The 60s were an unraveling time with worse and great and bad and good. And today you can see it more clearly. And there's such actually an hecatomb. In my book, I have a chapter called Survivors, ? And I list all the people that, vanished, perished. And that's also part of the 60s. But I suppose every revolution has to have their dead and their martyrs. And the real revolution, which I hope will eventually come, is an internal revolution where people decide to change. But that's the hardest of it because you cannot force on anyone to change internally. I think life has to be goal-orientated. That doesn't mean you cannot play along the way, but no. I think, again, America had become the uncontested leader of the world because of their prosperity. And so therefore, it looks like nobody would never be hungry, that you did not have to work. So a lot was linked to the economical situation, I think. So therefore, the kids wanted to play. They wanted to make love and not war, and that's it. Yeah, but the question is, today, if we were to keep the books and see the plus and the minus, what have we gained and what have we lost? It's very hard to come to conclusion. I think the interesting fact, though, was that youth became more proeminent and became in power, you might say. Youth realized it had power. It was not so much the housewife or the, old guy with the beard. And so they had a voice and they expressed their voice. Just as much as today, a fetus has a voice and is being represented by a lawyer. Well, in the 60s, I was really dizzy, I'm sorry to say. I was not thinking. So I can't really say who I was and what I was and why I was there. I was not thinking about goal, direction. It was just, like living 15 minutes from 15 minutes. And that's really the great phrase. Why that famous for 15 minutes? Well, actually, it's created by the television slot. And people can concentrate for 15 minutes, no more. And life in the 60s was really that, I'm sorry to say. Things were split in every direction, and the sky was open, and everything was possible and permissible. And it was an experimenting time. And if you speak of the drug, Tim Leary, I remember going to one of his first conference on a Park Avenue apartment, very elegant, with those very high society lady. And he was telling us that, this was a new age, that we had found those drugs that could open your mind and your intelligence, and you could use all of your brain finally, and everybody believed it. So, this was an experimental time. But so, every decade is so very different. This is so strange. It looks like when you turn to zero, things happen, and every decade has its own style, preoccupation, economy. It's weird.
I mean, New York certainly was the pot-boiling situation that I needed to go in. I mean, it was Lenny Bruce, it was the Beat Poets, all of that was going on, and that was what I was aiming at. It just seemed to me to be really a fertile swampland that you could really get a lot of things done very quickly.
John Cale, well, he looks good. I'm happy he didn't have a facelift. Men are lucky they don't have to have facelift as women do. Anyway, bright guy, intelligent guy, great talent. He's right. I mean, that was the time to come to New York. Why did I come to New York? Well, I did not know about New York, but I know about America. And America was the land of freedom, and I wanted freedom. I was tired of being locked up by tradition, family, religion, you name it. And we all landed in New York. And I think the brave people that came to New York were actually looking for something else, looking even for themselves to self-create themselves and to find out who they are and what they can do. Hence, a lot of people taking those funny names at the factory. I think when Andy met me, he met me with Salvador Dalí, by the way, at a tea. And I think he saw an opportunity. He was an opportunist. I was a socialite at the time, and that's what he wanted, society. And I was foreign, maybe at the time in the 60s, that had some appeal. I don't think today it has any appeal, on the contrary. And I'm trying to speak English without a trace of accent. I'm working at it. I don't yet have it. I was aware when I was next to Salvador Dalí, for instance, that I was next to a historical monument. And when I was next to Warhol, I did not know it would maybe take such amplitude, but I realized that I was with someone that was out of the ordinary. There's no doubt about that. Yes. But anyway, the first thing he said was, "Oh, you're so beautiful. We should do a movie together," which that was his classic phrase, which he has told 100,000 people, and I was one of them, but I did not know. So I was flattered, and I said, okay. And I said, when, because I was quick also. And the next day I went to the factory, and we made, or I made, with him my first movie. I'm not sure there was film in the camera, though.
Well, attention, but not just attention, attention from the camera, right? The camera was the thing that made that scene. You know, you went and the camera was always running.
She said that the camera was always rolling. That's true. Big deal. Anyone can have a camera that keeps rolling. You know, Andy was such a weird character. Andy had so many problems. He had problem with his skin, albino. He had problem with his hair, bold, you know, I mean, how embarrassing if you want to be part of the youth culture. He had problem with his eyes. He had vision problem. At one time, he had glasses with one hole so he would concentrate his eye vision. He had problem with his speech. He was dyslexic. Anyway, he had problem with everything, not only physically, but psychologically. So he could not express himself, didn't know what he wanted to say. So I think just to be filming, to go back to her quote, the camera being on all the time, gave Andy the impression that he was doing something. But Warhol also had that certain magic touch where, well, first of all, he would always flatter people. You know, oh, this is great. Oh, you're great. Oh, this was a great performance, and you didn't perform at all. You know, but it would encourage you. And then you would become more secure and freer. And he would so like needle you and push you so you would deliver more or be more provocative or be more out something. Oh, he would say, you know, you're so beautiful. Gee, what you said was great. Gee, you're so smart. Gee. Just approving, you know, he was really the father confessor in a way, because he was listening, since he didn't talk very much. And, well, was listening, no. He pretended to be listening. What am I saying? He never listened, but he let you talk. And he had a lot of talker around him. So people felt at ease. And he was non-judgmental, outwardly anyway. And I think his movies were very much about psychology in a way, and letting people be themselves, say what they want to say, do what they want to do. So that's, and actually when you saw yourself on film, that was sort of very interesting from a psychology point of view, saying, wow, I really said that, I look like this, I've done that, and you could really become an introspection moment with yourself.
Well, it was all intuitive, I mean, with me. That's why we thought we were inventing, or I thought this was some new revolutionary film technique that was going to really, you know, change the face of cinema forever. Because, and I think that's why I got along too so well with Andy, and why, you know, it seemed that we were doing, you know, fabulous things with those movies. At the Warhol Museum, and I thought they were the most boring things I'd ever seen. I just couldn't even listen. I kept saying, fast forward, fast forward, fast forward. They were incredibly boring. Well, you know what Picasso said. You know what Picasso said?
No, what did he say?
The originator always makes the thing ugly and the imitators make it pretty.
I like Viva, but I felt there was always a little bit of competition there. She did more film than I, but I was getting in the press a lot, and I think she resented that. And she actually was a very good painter, and she should have continued. Viva says that to be human is hilariously funny, or ridiculous, I'm not sure which. And yeah, I think God had a sense of humor. If you look at giraffe and worms and mosquitoes and donkeys and, you know, but God created tears and laughter, and I think we have to use both in equal quantity, possibly. In fact, you cannot know happiness if you have not known pain or trouble. Everything in the universe exists with its opposition. Now, where does Warhol fit into this? He was a clever little elf, and he realized what the time were, and he decided, as a good American, to capitalize on it. When the critics say that they denounce consumerism, not true. On the contrary, he capitalized on it. When you make a painting, when you don't even make it, you have someone make it and you sign it and you sell it. Is not that capitalism? And this idea of silkscreen and replica that everyone should have an Andy Warhol in their home, that's not a democratic move, it's a capitalism move. Well, I think any artist, any contemporary artist in any century, and you could take Picasso as an example or others, when they're starting, they have no experience, they have to do anything, everything, they have to shock. If they do not shock, they will not be recognized. You know, the Campbell can soup is the modern landscape of the 60s, because you don't have in New York field with cows and carrots growing, but in those Campbell can soup you have, it's a still life of the 60s. And of course, to think of it was pretty daring. I remember Dalí's reaction to it. He said, "This is unbelievable." And it was unbelievable. So did Warhol do it because he felt really those were the new still life, which is a very classic theme in art? Or was that going to be like, you know, a blow into the, well, abstract expressionist and the traditional? Maybe there was both, I think. Yeah. I think Warhol had a certain sense of low-key, of humor and provocation. I mean, it was very much about provocation. You know, when in some of those movies it was borderline with pornography, I mean, that's provocation. Oh, yeah. Of course, he wanted the thing to explode maybe and be freer, be exposed, you know, to the majority. But I think there's provocation. And they have to do it on a shoestring, and that's what Warhol did. And what actually, I think the dream of Warhol was to become a male Marilyn Monroe. He wanted fame, 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 and fame and money equates hand in hand. And actually, he really wanted the establishment. He wanted to be establishment, and he became establishment, and that's that simple.
When you're on the inside, when you're on the in crowd, as it were, like we would go to a house in Philadelphia, you know, that very, very rich people were having Warhol come to. And so they would have a party, and then Warhol would arrive, and that would make them very in. And people just look so stupid because, I mean, actually, if I was one of them, we would have looked so stupid. There we are, dressed in black, you know, needles hanging out of our ears, you know, can't even, you know, take our sunglasses off. Can't eat, although the food is fabulous. Only talk to each other, never talk to anybody else. I mean, you know, the most repressed group in the world. But, and here these people are, you know, they're playing tennis, they're having a great time, they're fabulously wonderful, you know. So who was the fool? But nevertheless, we were the in crowd.
That's true, we were the in crowd, but what's the in crowd? Well, I guess it's the crowd that is talked about, the crowd that's photographed, the crowd that's in the news. I mean, you do have social pages with Mr. and Mrs. so-and-so, but they are indeed so stiff usually, they like on a broom. And she's right, I mean, they play golf and this and that, but actually their life is very, very boring. It's empty. I suppose there's no creativity. They follow a mold. And there's, I suppose, supreme hypocrisy. Because maybe when the doors are closed and the shutters are closed, maybe things go on that nobody knows about. Where at the factory things were in the open. I suppose that was probably the great difference. And, you know, at the factory people were style, trender, setter, were those that just follow, yeah, I mean, no imagination. You know, they would go to collection of fashion in Paris and buy what was presented to them, but they would never invent a costume as we did. going through thrift shop and putting things together. Well, I remember Andy's idea was to go to all those fabulous houses under the pretext of sometime filming the bathroom. We are doing a film on bathroom. That's a great excuse to enter people's home. And before you know, before you go out, somehow you end up doing the portrait of Mrs. So-and-so for $40,000. So this is a very well orchestrated action. What is fame, enduring fame? I think it's a glimpse of immortality. If you're famous, you believe that you're immortal. And in fact, if you look around, the most famous people or name are the name of deity. So people want to be God. And I believe we are literal children of God, so it's maybe going back to our original roots. I wrote a paper on Warhol, which is called The American Dream, the American Disaster, and the American Deity. And my conclusion about Warhol's work is that he represented the American dream in his pop art, and then the American disaster, which is the opposite, like yin and yang. And the conclusion of his work is the last work he was doing before he died, which were American deity, quote, quote, which was really of a spiritual nature. The Last Supper, the Madonnas, the cross, words from the scripture, which very few people know yet. According to the scripture, there's different mention. You know, you can maybe go back into God's presence because you are literally their children and you have the potential of being God. And I think those are the conclusion of Warhol. Though he never said it that way, it's very subtle, but his work speaks for it. You know, he had all those portraits of Christ, even though some were upside down, and that was where he was going. You know, an interesting thing, when Warhol passed away, the night he passed away, I should say, he came to me in a dream, and I did not know, of course, he was passing away. And the dream was very prophetic, and that's how I read it. We were in a place almost like a cathedral, but with open ceiling, maybe like in half ruins. And there was some kind of a mist. It was very Wagnerian. And we were walking amidst a million objects. And at the time, I did not quite know his mania for collecting. And we were walking, and Andy was looking at those things almost regretfully, like, you know, oh, I'm going to go and I cannot take them with me. And I remember telling him, the shroud has no pocket. And then anyway, I woke up and I had breakfast and the radio was on, and I heard that Warhol had died at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And I sat down and the dream came back to me, and I realized that, but you know, why would he come to me? I mean, this is not the first time that people come to me when they pass away, but there's a reason, there's a meaning. And maybe he was looking for comfort, help, or was letting me know he was going. And I would not say to carry on because that's too pretentious, but you know, there had to be meaning into this. And I think he was actually concerned by spirituality, even though his life had many turns, but he was getting to that, and he had incredible intuition, and I think he knew the end was coming, and he had said, if I go into the hospital, I will not come out, and that was prophetic. Well, yeah. I think they ended for me when I clinically died, which was in 1973. So after that, obviously I came back, but it took me a year to recover. And I was left very vulnerable and fragile. And I sort of left the factory had changed anyway. It went through many phases and stages. But I took my distance. And then I really started to believe in God and practice. And the people at the factory would say, she's now crazy, she believes in God. And I did not need this kind of reaction because I had my own pain and death and rebirth. Anyway, but that's for me when it ended.
Artifacts is a free oral histories platform. Please like, subscribe, and visit our website, www.artifacts.movie, for exclusive bonus content. If you're able, please make a tax-deductible donation at www.artifacts.movie/donate. Hit the link on screen to watch another Artifacts interview.